Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is spark, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Artem. Thank you so much for this suggestion. Now, let's take a moment and review some of the definitions. The first way you might hear the verb spark used can mean to emit sparks of fire or electricity. For this first definition, I thought it might help to have a picture. And what came to my mind was the image of a welder, right? So, someone who's using very hot temperatures in order to connect metal or other materials. So, in the picture in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, right, you can see this these sparks, which is really the noun form of this word, coming from that process. So little bits of fire or electricity. A second way you'll hear spark used can mean to ignite, which is just another way of saying to start a fire. A third way we use the verb spark means to provide the stimulus for an event or for a process. So, for this third definition, think of the verb cause, right? So, something is creating or stimulating a particular event or process. For now, you should know that spark is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms sparky. The past tense and the participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Now, our base verb, spark, ends with a K sound. And this K sound is unvoiced. My vocal cords are not moving when I make this particular sound. This means the ed ending is going to make a T sound. And I will not add an extra syllable as I say it. So the past tense and the participle forms of the verb should sound like this: sparked, sparked. Okay. Now, I do have a couple phrasal verbs for us to look at today. The first one we'll discuss is to spark off. This can have a couple different meanings. One goes back to an earlier definition, the second one, where we were talking about igniting or setting fire to something. An example of this in a sentence might be, they sparked off the fireworks in the field behind their house. Now, where I live in the Midwest in the United States, I wouldn't say this is a very common phrasal verb. Many times, in connection with fireworks, particularly, you're just going to hear people say set. They set off fireworks. Okay. Now, a second way you might hear spark off used means to cause something to happen or to cause something to begin. An example of this: the election results have sparked off serious debates. Okay. Now, the second phrasal verb we'll discuss today is spark up. It also can have a couple different meanings. That first meaning is going to be very similar. So instead of spark off meaning to cause something to happen, spark up can also mean to begin something, to initiate it. And spark up is commonly used when we're talking about beginning a conversation, an argument, or a debate. An example of this: have you ever sparked up a conversation with a stranger on a plane? Right? So, have you started, attempting at least, to have a conversation with someone you don't know, someone you're not traveling with? A second way to use spark up means to ignite a tobacco product in order to smoke it. Okay, so you might hear somebody say something like, you can't spark up in here, right? It means you can't start smoking in this particular place. Now let's continue using our verb of the day, and we'll review a couple of verb tenses. Today, let's talk about the simple present and the present perfect progressive. We'll start with the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. Now, the thing to remember is that our verb will change a bit based on what our subject is. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, then you're just going to use the base verb in the affirmative. But if your subject is he, she, or it, you need to add an S to the end of the verb. You can see that in my first example sentence. Careless behavior sparks hundreds of fires every year. Would go back to that second definition of igniting, starting a fire. Okay? Behavior here is singular, even though it's referring to the acts of many people. So it's like an it. That's why you see an S on the end of the verb. Now let's talk about making negative sentences in the simple present. To do this, again, pay attention to your subject. If the subject is I, you, we, or they, use do not and then the base verb. If your subject is he, she, or it, then use does not and the base verb. You might also hear or see the contractions don't and doesn't. Let's take a look at another example. The company's strategies don't spark confidence. Okay, so here it's kind of like it's not creating that particular feeling. It's not beginning to make people have that particular feeling. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, start with do or does, then you're going to have your subject, and then the base verb. I always like to point out to my students, notice the only time we're adding an S to the end of the verb is in the affirmative when the subject is he, she, or it. Let's look at that last question I have for us. Does this item spark joy? So it's a question I heard a lot as a particulars writer and thoughts on possessions and kind of this idea that there's so much clutter. But asking yourself, right, does this particular thing make you happy, give you joy? If not, get rid of it. Okay. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the present perfect progressive. Many textbooks and other YouTube videos will also call this the present perfect continuous, and that is just fine. It means exactly the same thing. We're using this verb tense to talk about actions that started in the past and are continuing into the present. Many times we're using this verb tense to really stress how long a particular action has been ongoing. Now, the reason I like saying present perfect progressive is that the three-letter P's in this verb tense name can help my students remember that they need three parts to make our verb. This is another verb tense where we need to pay attention to our subject. If the subject is I, you, we, or they, use have, that's your first part, been, the participle B-E-E-N, and then the ing form of the verb. Okay? Now, if your subject is he, she, or it, you're going to use has, H-A-S. Then the participle been, B-E-E-N, and then the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example. The unusually high level of E. coli in the lake has been sparking the interest of researchers. Right? So we'd go back to that third definition. Okay? Here, level is singular. That's why you see has. Now, if you want to make negative present perfect progressive sentences, again, pay attention to your subject. Okay? After the subject, we'll use either has not or have not, then the participle been, and then the ing form the verb. Let's take a look at another example. The New Zealand stock market has not been sparking investor enthusiasm over the last few years. So again, we're kind of focused on how long that particular action has been ongoing. This sentence comes from a fairly recent newspaper article on that particular subject. So the information should still be fairly accurate there. Finally, let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive. Okay. Well, to do that, we're going to start with have or has. Whichever form matches our subject, that subject comes next. Then use the participle been, and then the ing ending to the verb. Here's a last example. Has their behavior been sparking dating rumors? Right? Sometimes you hear this in connection to gossip, right? what someone said, maybe what someone posted on social media now, or something else, kind of igniting or beginning this idea of gossip. So, here, rumors that two people are dating. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words and a phrase related to our verb spark. And the first thing we're going to discuss today is just the noun form of this word. The noun spark has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation as our verb. This noun can have a number of different meanings. One way to use it is to talk about that small, fiery particle that's thrown off from a fire, or maybe that's produced by striking two hard surfaces together like stone or metal. An example of this might be, don't stand so close to the fire that the sparks reach you. Right? Maybe you've had this experience in a fireplace, maybe an outdoor fire, right? It sort of crackles and you see those little fiery particles, small pieces, if you will, being kind of pushed from the main intense part of the fire. Now, a second way to use the noun spark is to talk about a small flash of light. So, might hear somebody ask, did you see that spark in the sky? A third way to use the noun spark is to refer to a trace of a specified quality or an intense feeling. An example of this. There were no sparks of anger between us when we were working on this project, right? So, again, trace means small amount, right? So not even the littlest bit of anger. A fourth way to use the noun spark is to talk about a sense of liveliness or excitement. An example of how you might hear that used in a sentence. The couple said they both felt sparks the first time they met. So sometimes this is used in connection to dating, kind of to express sort of those romantic feelings. So kind of like that idea of a fire beginning. Now, I do have a phrase that you might encounter, and that's sparks fly. And that generally means some sort of encounter is becoming quite heated or lively. An example of this might be, sparks always fly when those two begin debating, right? So this is not just two people having a discussion about particular issues, but we might say the conversation gets quite intense or heated. And that's why that phrase gets used to be a bit more descriptive. Again, I want to say a special thanks to Artem for suggesting today's verb, and I want to thank you all for watching. Have a great day.